For 2 years, Doug Weiss was everywhere at Daystar. On the set, in the meetings, in the ministry, standing beside Joni Lamb on camera, holding her hand, calling himself her husband, comfortable, settled, acting for all the world like a man who had found his permanent place. And then Joni Lamb died. And then Rachel Lamb Brown said something to him, out loud, in front of witnesses. And Doug Weiss, the man who could not stop being visible at this network for 2 straight years, disappeared. Not stepped back, not took a break, disappeared. Social media dark. Daystar appearances, 0. So what exactly did Rachel say? And more importantly, who gave her the power to say it? Today, we are talking about power. Real power. Not the kind that comes from a television camera, or a counseling credential, or a marriage certificate. The kind that is in the blood. The kind that was built by a father who started with 2 cameras in Alabama and ended with a network that reached 200 countries. The kind that cannot be handed to you through a wedding. It can only be inherited. And Rachel Lamb Brown, the daughter of Marcus and Joni Lamb, just made sure Doug Weiss understood the difference. Before we can understand what Rachel did, we need to understand what Doug Weiss actually had. Because what he had and what he thought he had turned out to be 2 very different things. Doug Weiss entered the Daystar orbit through one door and one door only, his marriage to Joni Lamb. That is not a criticism. That is simply the truth. He did not build Daystar. He did not sacrifice for Daystar. He was not there when Marcus and Joni started with nothing in Montgomery, Alabama. He was not there for the decades of building, the battles, the breakthroughs, the giving campaigns, the studio expansions, the international reach. He arrived in June of 2022 through a wedding, and from that moment, he was everywhere, co-hosting ministry now, speaking at Daystar events, appearing across the network's programming, embedded in the daily rhythms of the ministry, acting, for all intents and purposes, like a man who had come home rather than a man who had been invited in. There were questions about that marriage from the very beginning. Jonathan Lamb raised concerns about whether Doug's previous marriage had ended on biblical grounds. Those concerns were never satisfactorily resolved publicly, and they never fully went away. But while Joni was alive, Doug Weiss had something nobody else had. He had her ear. He had her protection. And in the Daystar ecosystem, proximity to Joni Lamb was the only currency that mattered. The problem with a currency tied to one person is what happens when that person is gone. Joni Lamb died on May 7, 2026. And within what felt like hours, the ground underneath Doug Weiss began to move. Sources described as credible and present. People who were in that building and cannot be named publicly have confirmed that Rachel Lamb Brown and Doug Weiss had a confrontation, not a quiet disagreement, not a tense exchange behind a closed door, a confrontation, out loud, in front of multiple witnesses, something that set them both off, something the people in that building heard and saw, and will not easily forget. We do not have the exact words. We do not have a recording. We are not going to speculate about the precise content of what was said. What we know from people who were there is that it happened. And what we can observe from everything that has unfolded since is that it landed, because Doug Weiss has not been seen or heard from publicly since. Think about what that means. This is a man who was posting regularly on his Dr. Doug social media handle. Regular content, counseling videos, active and consistent. Since the confrontation with Rachel, silence. Complete silence. His handle has gone dark. His Daystar appearances have ceased entirely. The man who is embedded in this network's daily programming has been removed from its visible life without a single public statement, a single explanation, or a single farewell. And Rachel Lamb Brown, the woman he argued with, is still there, still on camera, still hosting, still the face of what Daystar is becoming. Let's lay this out plainly, because the contrast could not be more stark. Rachel Lamb Brown is the daughter of Marcus Lamb, the daughter of Joni Lamb, the director of communications, an on-air host, the most visible and active member of the Lamb family, and is still performing on screen with ministry, now reportedly transitioning to her leadership. Doug Weiss married into the ministry in 2022, held no official title beyond his proximity to Joni, currently has 0 Daystar appearances, a social media handle that has gone dark, no platform, no camera pointed in his direction, and is engaged in ongoing estate litigation, silent and withdrawn. This is not a close contest. This is not a complicated political situation. This is a simple and ancient truth playing out in real time. When the person who brought you into the house is gone, the people born into the house decide whether you stay. And Rachel Lamb Brown, daughter of Marcus and Joni, blood heir to everything this ministry is, has decided. Here is something that has not received nearly enough attention in this story. The home that Joni Lamb built in her final year, the multi-million-dollar home in the Dallas area, the one she was reportedly able to enjoy for only about a year before she passed. That home is not in Doug Weiss's name, not in his name at all. The home was left to the children, to Marcus and Joni's children, Jonathan, Rachel, and Rebecca, not to the man who married their mother. And inside that home, Joni's jewelry, her diamonds, the precious and irreplaceable personal treasures of a woman who gave her entire adult life to something she believed in. None of it belongs to Doug Weiss, and Rachel knows it. Rachel and Rebecca never liked Doug Weiss. That is not a surprise to anyone who has followed this story closely. They called him, privately, by a nickname that combined affectionate contempt with the resignation of daughters who had no real choice. They smiled on camera when Joni brought him around. They attended the events. They kept the peace. They did everything necessary to avoid the fate their brother Jonathan suffered when he refused to comply. But they were not complying because they believed in Doug. They were complying because they believed in Joni, and because they understood correctly that going against Joni while she was alive was a war they could not win. Joni is no longer alive. The compliance is over. The patience is over. The strategic silence is over. And what is left when all that falls away is a daughter of Marcus Lamb, who has been waiting 2 years to say what she actually thinks. Doug Weiss's entire authority at Daystar rested on one thing: Joni Lamb's willingness to grant it. She is gone. The grant has expired. And the people who were born into this ministry, who carry their father's DNA and their mother's name on this building, do not owe him a single thing. Ministry now is reportedly going to Rachel. Table talk is going to Rebecca. And Doug Weiss, according to sources close to the situation, has nowhere. There is no show for him. There is no platform. There is no camera pointed in his direction. There is no seat at the table, because the table no longer has a place set for a man whose invitation expired with the woman who gave it. The moment Joni died, Doug Weiss went from co-hosting the most-watched program on the network to being a man in a building that no longer has any particular reason to have him in it. Rachel did not need to do much. She just needed to say what had always been true. And apparently in front of those witnesses, that is exactly what she did. But Rachel Lamb Brown did not stop at the argument. Rachel went to court. Within days of Joni's passing, Rachel Lamb Brown appeared at a courthouse in Texas in connection with what appears to be a contest involving Joni's will. 2 documents were submitted, an old will and a new will. And you only go to court over a will when something in that document surprised you, when what your mother left behind is not what you expected to find. The full contents of that legal action are still unfolding, but the questions it raises are precise and important. Was Doug Weiss expecting something from Joni's estate that the new will does not give him? Did Joni, in her final weeks, when she reportedly stated on her own recorded voice that Doug lied, make changes to her financial documents that reflect a change of heart? Is Rachel in that courthouse fighting a battle that protects her family's inheritance from a man they never wanted in the family to begin with? Consider the timing. Joni downsized significantly in her final year. She sold 3 homes. She placed 4 properties into a revocable trust. She restructured everything. And then she died. And then Rachel went to court. That sequence is not random. That is a woman who inherited her mother's fighter instinct and her father's strategic mind, using both of them to ensure that what Marcus and Joni Lamb built does not end up in the hands of a man who had nothing to do with building it. And here is what Laura Lynn Thompson, who has been closer to the story than almost anyone, said publicly, and it is worth quoting directly. She said that if Rachel is in a court to hold Doug Weiss accountable to what Joni actually left behind, then the response is simple. Asterisk. If Rachel Lamb is trying to bring accountability and deal with what Doug Weiss might be getting, we are Team Rachel. Let's have a standing ovation right now. Asterisk. That is not a small statement from a woman who has spent 2 years documenting Rachel's choices and finding many of them deeply troubling. That is a recognition that on this specific issue, getting Doug Weiss out of what he did not earn, Rachel Lamb Brown may be doing exactly the right thing. That is the complexity of this story. Rachel is not a simple character. She has made choices that this community has been profoundly troubled by, including her treatment of Jonathan at the funeral, her silence on the unresolved and deeply serious allegations against her husband Joshua Brown, and her willingness to let a power structure continue protecting the wrong people for the better part of 2 years. But on pushing Doug Weiss out of ministry he did not build, an estate he did not earn, Rachel Lamb Brown is not wrong. She is her father's daughter, and she is acting like it. Here is something worth sitting with carefully. For as long as Doug Weiss has been part of the Daystar story, Rachel Lamb Brown was strategically, deliberately, and publicly compliant. She smiled at him on camera. She appeared beside him at events. She kept her feelings entirely off the record. And there was a reason for that. It had a name. The name was Jonathan Lamb. Rachel watched what happened to her brother when he refused to comply. She watched him get fired, surveilled, excluded from his mother's funeral, locked out of every room in the building his father built. And she made a calculation, whether right or wrong, that the cost of open resistance was too high while Joni was alive and capable of enforcing the consequences. So she played the game. She kept the peace. She stayed in the building. She held her tongue. And then Joni died. And Rachel Lamb Brown apparently stopped playing the game. The woman who confronted Doug Weiss in front of witnesses is not a different person than the woman who smiled beside him on camera. She is the same woman, finally in a position to say what she actually thinks, finally holding power that does not depend on her mother's approval to be real, finally standing in the house her father built as a daughter of Marcus Lamb, not as a daughter-in-law of someone her mother chose. That shift from compliance to authority is one of the most significant things that has happened at Daystar since Joni died, because it tells you something about what the next chapter of this ministry looks like, who will actually be in charge, and who is never going to survive the transition from Joni's Daystar to whatever comes next. Doug Weiss was never going to survive it. He just did not know that until Rachel told him. Now, before anyone in this audience starts celebrating Rachel Lamb Brown as a hero of this story, let's be honest about what we're actually looking at. This is not a simple redemption arc. It is not a straightforward victory for truth. Rachel pushing Doug Weiss out is right. It is the correct move. It is what any daughter of Marcus Lamb should have done the moment the leverage that kept Doug in place was removed. But Rachel is still the woman who stood at her mother's funeral and did not say her brother's name. She is still the woman whose husband Joshua Brown is the subject of unresolved and deeply serious allegations involving a child. She is still the woman who bowed to a power structure that destroyed Jonathan and Susie's lives at Daystar and chose to remain in that structure rather than stand beside her brother. Removing Doug Weiss does not resolve any of that. It does not reconcile the family. It does not restore Jonathan. It does not address the child at the center of the most painful allegation in this entire saga. It does not clean the house. It just removes one man who should never have been there in the first place. The harder work is still ahead. And the question that Rachel Lamb Brown now has to answer, with the power she is clearly accumulating, is whether she will use it only to protect what she wants, or whether she will use it to do what this ministry actually needs. There's a young man named Jonathan Lamb who sold his house, who lost his title, who was excluded from his mother's memorial, who sat in the building his father created from nothing, and was treated as a guest who had overstayed his welcome, who reportedly, in the final hours of her life, his own mother named, and may have changed her will to reflect. If Rachel Lamb Brown has the strength to send Doug Weiss into hiding, she has the strength to open a door that has been deliberately closed for years, to honor not just her mother's memory, but her father's actual, documented, witnessed, board-ratified dying wish. Because Marcus Lamb did not build Daystar for Doug Weiss. He did not build it for Rachel alone. He built it for a family, and he named his son to lead it. The woman who just proved she is powerful enough to remove someone who should not have been there is powerful enough to restore someone who should never have been pushed out. The only question is whether she will. Rachel Lamb Brown just demonstrated she has both the power and the will to remove Doug Weiss from everything he was never entitled to. That same power, if she chose to use it, could open the door for Jonathan Lamb to come home to the ministry his father built for him. Do you believe she will? Or does her power stop exactly where her comfort begins? Tell us in the comments below. Subscribe, share this video, and stay close, because the next chapter of the story is just beginning.